That day in court changed my life forever. I'm Alexander Reed, 38. And up until then, my life was all about spreadsheets and perfectly lined up numbers in my accounting office. The recent divorce after 12 years of marriage made me even more withdrawn, buried in processes and tax reports. My obsession with control and precision turned me into one of Boston's most sought-after forensic accountants. Every misplaced number was like an off-key note in an otherwise perfect symphony. That constant pursuit of perfection isolated me from the world, creating a bubble of loneliness disguised as professionalism. But that October afternoon, when I walked through the doors of the federal court, I had no idea that my meticulously organized world was about to be completely reshaped by just one look. If you've ever had your life transformed by an unexpected encounter, hit that like button and subscribe. The courthouse was like my second home. The austere marble walls reflected the light coming in through the historic stained glass, creating a burst of colors over the files on my desk. The smell of fresh coffee from the staff room mixed with that unmistakable scent of paper and old wood. My routine was as precise as a Swiss watch. By 6 a.m., I was already hunched over financial reports, searching for inconsistencies in every number. The silence of those early hours was broken only by the sound of my fingers on the keyboard and the occasional clink of cups in the hallway. It was during a hearing on tax fraud that my orderly world started to unravel. The case seemed simple, just another company trying to cheat the system. I was ready to present the evidence when he walked into the room. Judge Jonathan Pierce had a presence that commanded instant respect. Tall, with graying hair at his temples and piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through everything. His deep voice filled the room as he led the proceedings with a natural authority that left me momentarily speechless. During my presentation, I noticed his fixed gaze on me. It wasn't the usual bored look that judges normally give during technical explanations. Pierce seemed to soak up every detail, every number I showed him. At one point, he interrupted me with a question so specific about a particular detail in the records that it caught me off guard. "Mr. Reed, your analysis of the deviation pattern in the third quarter is particularly interesting." His voice echoed through the room. "Could you elaborate on that?" That moment changed everything. While I was explaining the technical details, it felt like our minds were working in perfect sync. Every question he asked revealed a deep understanding not just of the law but also of the financial complexities I spent hours dissecting. After the hearing, while I was organizing my documents, Pierce came over. "Your attention to detail is impressive, Mr. Reed. I rarely see analyses as meticulous as yours." The compliment should have made me proud, but something in his tone, the way his eyes lingered on mine, stirred a different kind of unease. "The court needs more professionals as dedicated as you," he continued, adjusting his robe. "I hope to see you around here more often." I left the courthouse that day with a strange feeling in my chest. My mind, usually focused on numbers and patterns, was now preoccupied with something entirely different. The way Pierce could exude both power and kindness at the same time, and how his presence destabilized my perfectly controlled world. In the following weeks, my visits to the courthouse took on a whole new meaning. What used to be just work turned into a series of chance encounters with Pierce. Our paths kept crossing far too often to be mere coincidence. During breaks between sessions, we'd run into each other in the legal library. Pierce had a habit of leafing through old tax law books, the very same ones I used for my cases. Our conversations started about legal cases, but soon they'd drift to more personal territory. "You know, Alexander," he once said, as we analyzed an especially complex case, "sometimes I wonder if justice is found more in the gaps between the laws than in the laws themselves." His way of thinking fascinated me. Pierce had a unique way of looking beyond appearances, of finding meaning where others only saw rules. Over coffee breaks, we chatted about everything from philosophy to classical music. I discovered that we both loved Bach, and that we found the same satisfaction in the precision of his fugues, as I did in unraveling a complicated financial scheme. One afternoon, while we were reviewing documents in his office, Pierce began talking about his own life, the pressures of his role, the loneliness that came with tough decisions, the weight of that robe he carried. For the first time, I saw beyond the authoritative figure of the judge. There was a man as complex and layered as the cases he presided over. "Sometimes," he confessed, "I need someone who understands not just the processes, but also the man behind the decisions." His eyes met mine, and I felt that all too familiar stirring in my chest. Our connection was evolving into something I couldn't quite put a name to, but it drew me in more and more. Everything started getting complicated when the Blackwood and Associates case landed on my desk. It was the biggest tax fraud case of the year, and Pierce was set to be the judge. The closeness we'd built now represented a conflict of interest that gnawed at me. During our conversations, I noticed Pierce was more tense than usual. The Judicial Committee was pressing him over recent decisions, and our meetings in the library were beginning to attract attention. The curious glances from the courthouse staff weighed on us. One afternoon, Benjamin Matthews, a lawyer known for his sharp tongue, made a snide remark about how often I visited the judge's office. I could feel my face go red, not because of the insinuation, but because I feared for Pierce's reputation. I started avoiding our casual meetings, throwing myself even more into work, but every time I bumped into Pierce in the corridors, my heart would race. The inner battle between my professionalism and my growing feelings for him was consuming me. How could I stay objective when just his presence upended my entire world? On a Friday afternoon, when the courthouse was nearly empty, I received an urgent message to come to Pierce's office. My heart pounded. It was about the Blackwood case, no doubt. I straightened my tie, organized my documents, and climbed the marble stairs, trying hard to keep my composure. When I walked in, I found Pierce standing by the window, watching the sun set over Boston. His imposing silhouette was highlighted by the golden light of dusk. He slowly turned when he heard my steps, and his gaze held an intensity I'd never seen before. "Alexander," his deep voice filled the room, "we need to talk about something beyond the Blackwood case." He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing, mesmerized by the energy emanating from him. "I've noticed you distancing yourself," he continued, stepping closer. "And I get why. Our connection has grown into something we can no longer ignore." Every word was spoken with deliberate precision, as if he were delivering a crucial sentence. The air in the office grew thick with unresolved tension. Pierce was now only a few steps away, his subtle cologne mixing with the scent of old books and polished wood. I could feel my breathing quicken. "I can't pretend anymore that this is just a professional relationship," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "For weeks, I've been fighting these feelings whenever you're around. Your intelligence, your dedication, you stir something in me that I thought I had buried long ago." My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my glasses, a nervous habit that always gave me away in tense moments. "Your Honor, Jonathan," I began, my voice faltering. "This is complicated," he finished for me, taking another step closer. "Yeah, it is. But since when has something complicated ever stopped us from chasing the truth?" The space between us dwindled with every second. I could see every detail on his face, the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. The world outside seemed to vanish completely. "Maybe," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's time we admit that some connections are inevitable, no matter the circumstances." At that moment, we heard footsteps in the corridor. We quickly pulled back, and seconds later, Benjamin Matthews appeared at the door with some documents. The moment had been broken, but the tension still hung in the air, palpable and undeniable. Matthews noticed something was off, his eyes shifting between us with barely hidden curiosity. After a few words about pending cases, he left, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Pierce ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his own agitation. "We need to continue this conversation," he finally said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, "in a more appropriate place." I nodded silently, unable to trust my own voice at that moment. As I left his office, I felt that I had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. Whatever was between us had finally come to light, and now we had to decide what to do about it. That night, Pierce invited me to his place in Beacon Hill, a historic mansion that reflected his status. When I got there, he greeted me with a glass of aged scotch. His private library was just as impressive as his courtroom. But there, away from prying eyes, the atmosphere was completely different. "Have you ever tried an 18-year-old Macallan?" he asked, pouring the amber liquid into crystal glasses. The rich aroma filled the room as we looked out at the lit-up city through the French windows. The conversation flowed naturally, but the tension between us grew with every minute. Pierce shed his formal demeanor, and the top buttons of his shirt coming undone revealed a more human side of the man I only knew in his robe. "You know what fascinates me most about you, Alexander," he murmured, moving closer. "Your precision, the way you analyze every detail, how you break down every problem to its core." His fingers lightly brushed my wrist as he reached for my empty glass. That touch sent shivers down my spine. His nearness was intoxicating, stronger than the scotch we shared. His green eyes, usually so composed, now revealed an intense desire that mirrored my own. Our first contact was like an electric current. His strong hands cupped my face, and all my self-control vanished in that heated moment. Years of repression and denial melted away in the warmth of that encounter. Our bodies met with the same intensity as our minds. Every touch was a discovery, every sigh a silent confession. Pierce's moves were as precise as his judgments, but now that precision was focused solely on exploring every inch of me. The library became our private universe. Among the old shelves, we discovered a rhythm that went beyond the physical. Every caress was like cracking a new code. Every kiss the unveiling of a secret long kept hidden. His lips traced a path of discoveries along my neck, while my hands roamed his body with the same dedication I devoted to my most complex cases. Time seemed to stop. It was just us, and the growing desire that consumed us. Alexander. He whispered my name like a prayer, his voice husky with desire. Our breaths mingled, our bodies moving in a synchronized dance of pleasure and discovery. The climax hit like a tidal wave, washing away all fears and hesitations. For a moment, we weren't a judge and an accountant, just two men lost in the ecstasy of a deep, genuine connection. Later, lying on the leather sofa, watching the city's lights through the windows, I felt a peace I had never known. Pierce traced lazy patterns on my back as we shared a comfortable silence. "This changes everything," I murmured against his chest. "It only changes what needed to be changed," he replied, his voice full of certainty. "Some truths have to be revealed, Alexander, no matter how much we try to deny them." The night wore on, but we stayed there, discovering new aspects of each other, free of the masks we wore in court. It was the start of a new chapter, written in the ink of honesty and mutual desire. Dawn brought a new reality. Watching Pierce make coffee in the kitchen, dressed in nothing but a pair of dress pants and a half-buttoned white shirt, I realized just how much our dynamic had changed. He still carried that elegant demeanor, but there was a softness in his gestures that you'd never see in the courtroom. "We need to talk about the Blackwood case," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. My heart froze for a moment, but his calm smile eased me. "I'm recusing myself from judging it. I've already taken care of it." That decision said a lot about his character. Pierce was willing to give up an important case to preserve our professional integrity. "And what about us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're a different chapter," he replied, his green eyes locked on mine. "What happened last night wasn't a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment. It was the acknowledgement of something that had been growing for months." I ran my fingers along the rim of my cup, processing his words. The previous night had stirred feelings and emotions I didn't even know existed inside me. Every touch, every shared moment, had peeled away layers of protection I'd built over the years. "You know, what impressed me the most," he continued as he stepped closer, "was how completely you let go in that moment. You, who are always so controlled, so meticulous. Seeing you vulnerable was extraordinary." I felt my face heat up at the memory. "You're not exactly known for losing control either, Your Honor," I teased, a playful smile tugging at my lips. "Jonathan," he corrected gently, his hand meeting mine on the counter. "Here, I'm just Jonathan." The casual touch of his fingers sent familiar shivers coursing through me. It was surreal how even the smallest gestures now carried so much meaning. Our connection had evolved into something deeper, something real. "So, how are we going to handle this in court?" I asked, the rational part of my brain still worried about the practical implications. "With discretion and professionalism, as always," he replied thoughtfully. "But I'm not going to deny what I feel for you, Alexander. Not anymore. We can keep our professional and personal lives separate without sacrificing either." His words carried the same conviction he used when delivering his judgments. Pierce had a knack for making the most complex things seem simple and clear. "And what about the comments? Or people like Matthews?" I pressed. "Let them talk," he said with an elegant shrug. "Our professional integrity speaks for itself. The rest is just noise." In that moment, I realized I wasn't just starting a relationship. I was embarking on a journey of self-discovery. Pierce wasn't just offering me his affection. He was giving me a chance to become the most authentic version of myself. The morning sun poured golden light into the kitchen, creating an almost surreal scene. There, among coffee cups and newfound truths, I understood that my life had changed irrevocably, and for the first time in a long time, the thought of losing control didn't scare me. Instead, it made me feel more alive than ever. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button and give it a like to access more stories like this. 3 months had passed since that night in Pierce's library. Our relationship evolved into something I never imagined possible in my otherwise structured life. I learned that there's beauty in the unexpected, that not everything has to follow a predictable pattern to be perfect. In court, we still maintain our professional discretion. The curious glances and whispers in the hallways eventually faded away, replaced by the silent acceptance of our constant presence in each other's lives. Pierce remains the respected judge he's always been, and I still have my reputation as a meticulous accountant. But now, we carry with us a sweet secret that makes us smile when we least expect it. Our nights are filled with deep conversations, heated debates about justice and ethics, and intimate moments that make me wonder why I took so long to accept this part of myself. Pierce taught me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, and there's strength in allowing yourself to be true to who you really are. Life has a funny way of surprising us. Sometimes you need someone special to cross your path and show you truths that were there all along, just waiting to be discovered. For me, Pierce was that someone, the catalyst for a transformation I never knew I needed. Today, when I look out the window of his office, watching Boston at dusk, I don't just see a city. I see a world of possibilities that opened up when I let my heart speak louder than my mind. Every case I analyze, every number I check, still carries my signature precision. But now, there's a new dimension in my life, one that can't be quantified or categorized. For those who still hesitate to follow their hearts, who hide behind masks of perfection and control, here's my advice. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to simply be who you are. Love comes in many forms, and all of them are valid and worth living. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your own stories of discovery and transformation in the comments. After all, each of us has a love story waiting to be told. Hit the subscribe button and leave a like so you can get more stories like this.